Hello, beautiful people, and welcome.
Hi.
To a quick video on the new upcoming quote-unquote Abyss update, the Imaginarium Theater. So we can start with a quick little explanation of how it works. There's a total of 8 acts in which you're fighting different assortments of enemies. There is some monolith defense, endless waves of enemies, some bosses, and you load into it. You start with 6 characters. Now you can either use trial versions of these characters or you can use your own. On top of that, you'll want to have a reserve roster where you can pick up to 12 of your characters. Now from what I understand, you can invite one character from a friend or something. I'm not entirely sure how that works, but either way. You build a reserve roster of up to 12 characters that are restricted to Pyro, Electro, or Animo, with a few exceptions for whichever characters, most likely, whichever characters are going to be on banner during the patches. Either way though, you start with these 6 characters and 12 reserve characters. Each character starts with 2 Vigor, 2 Energy, 2 whatever, right? And every time you use them in one of the acts, they lose 1, which means each character can only be used twice. After you do each act, you get to select some buffs maybe, sometimes you get to recruit characters into your current roster from your reserve roster, right? So you start with only those 6 to choose from, and then throughout your run, you get to add characters to your roster based on what you have in your reserve roster. And with all of that, you try to make it through the 8 acts and kill the boss at the end. Very, very similar to the Triumphant Frenzy event for those of you that played during 4.4, where you started with some characters and every time you use them, they lose vigor. I'm not going to go through all of the buffs that you can get throughout your run, but very quickly, I'll look at just a few of them. After defeating an opponent, you gain 15% damage percent, up to 3 times. Character's attack is increased by 30% after receiving healing. Gain crit damage when you trigger a swirl, but lose it when you swap out. Effectively, you get a few combat buffs, but honestly, looking at the list, there's not that many of them that are that good, and a lot of them are just flat damage and don't really stack well with one another, which makes it so that this doesn't feel, for those of you that play Star Rail, this doesn't really feel similar to Simulated Universe, where you actually get a run with builds and you want to get specific buffs and whatever. It's not really that. It doesn't seem like any of the buffs or the buff synergies are all that game changing. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it's possible to or if it's easy to get max stars without using a single buff, because the buffs just don't do that much. Now, you have to have 12 reserve characters. As far as I understand, you cannot enter if you do not have 12 reserve characters, and your reserve characters have to be level 70 or higher of one of the 3 elements, or the exceptions that are the special invitations. Also, one you can borrow, yeah. I don't like that, because gacha games very often use type weaknesses as a way to try to give you an incentive to pull for multiple different carries. Very often you'll have enemies that are weak to a specific element, and where you want to use characters of that element to beat them, and that serves as an incentive to pull for characters. Genshin doesn't really have much type weakness stuff. Now there is shield breaking, which serves as its current main form of type weakness, but shield breaking can be done through your supports, and many of the supports have good ways to break shields. And that kind of makes it a little bit more difficult. You don't need to have a pyro carry. You don't need to have a hydro carry. You do need to have some usable pyro and hydro units, but once you have a couple supports, that's kind of all you need. And this tells me that Genshin is not happy with that. They don't want you to feel safe not having to pull for characters. And this is going to serve as Genshin's type weakness. It's not just that characters are going to be stronger against enemies in this type of content, is that you will literally not be allowed to use characters that do not fit these elemental types in this type of content. Now, this is the one for 4.7. It is, from what we understand, very likely that both the roster, the opening characters, the special invitations, and the elements, or the restrictions, whatever, change with further iterations of it, which means that it's not just a quote-unquote incentive to pull for pyro and electro carries and animo carries, it's also an incentive to pull for carries of other elements. And honestly, as someone who, isn't a big fan of the gacha business model, I see this attempt at using people's FOMO to try to make them feel forced to pull on specific characters. I see that and it makes me sad. I get that that's just what they're gonna do, but it makes me sad. To me, type weaknesses in, like, by themselves are kind of a shitty thing to have to begin with in a gacha game. I don't like artificial incentives to pull for specific characters just because of their kit. But I know that a lot of people are like, yeah, well, at least, you know, I have a bunch of characters, or I don't really have any characters I want to wish for right now. I'm kind of just sitting there with primos and I don't know what to do with them. And like, I understand why some people can be happy that there is going to be some content that lets them use their very well built 10 electro carries. But here's the problem with that. The problem is these enemies are significantly squishier than Abyss enemies. Which means that this is not actually an incentive to, you know, have well-built characters. It's literally just an incentive to wish for the characters and leave them medium built. It's not actually an incentive to, like, actually build up all of your characters to be very strong, because they just don't have that much HP. They're not going to be that difficult once you have enough characters to go in. And so it's like, it's not good for new players or free-to-play players that want to pull for specific units they like, because it's an incentive to pull for, like, specific elements that might just not have units you like. Alright, so it's kind of sucks for people that play the game that way, but it also is not difficult content. It's not a new form of endgame. It's gonna be pretty trivial to clear. Now, I really hope that that's just an issue with the first iteration of it. Because in a perfect world, something like this, right, should be a lot more like Star Rail's Simulated Universe, in the sense that the events and wondrous boons that you get, this is what they're called, whatever, should be more important than the character roster that you have. Like, how good your run is should have more of an impact than what characters you're using. Because otherwise, this is basically just overworld content. And I don't know if it's gonna actually make anyone happy. And so all of this to say, I really hope they actually change the boons, make them significantly more impactful, significantly stronger, add some synergy between them, and increase the HP totals of these things. To make it feel like what boons you pick actually matters, and to actually make it fun to play through the damn thing. In any case, the issues I have with it are definitely there, but at the very least, it is a new piece of content, which has a full-time streamer for Genshin. I finally have something else to do other than just, you know, standing here and sometimes going in. Alright, so like, on a personal note, I am glad this is happening, but I am very disappointed with the quality of it so far. At the end of the day though, this is all leaks, this is also still subject to change. I hope they change it before release, and in the absence of them doing that, I hope they change it for further iterations. On the bright side, the trial characters, you're gonna get to actually, you know, play with new characters before you pull for them in a situation that's more realistic than test runs. Test runs just suck for testing characters because the teams are generally not the greatest, and even when the teams are good, you get so much energy particles. The energy particles in test runs are omega buffed, so that you basically get all your bursts back instantly, and it kind of gives a fake impression of how the characters actually play. So at least, right, this is gonna be a more real experience of what the characters are, and assuming this is actually permanent, which seems to be, it's very likely that the trial characters are going to have the banner characters pretty damn often. So at least that's cool. For those of you that care only about the rewards, you get 1100 primos for first time clear, and 600 per reset, 620, whatever. And you can unlock some poses for the camera. Woohoo. It is also worth mentioning that these are not, like, these rewards that you're getting, they're not actually additional rewards, because with this coming out, Abyss will reset half as often. Instead of every 2 weeks Abyss resetting, Abyss is going to reset every 4 weeks, and this is going to reset every 4 weeks, and they're going to alternate. So there's going to be an Abyss reset, and then 2 weeks later, there's going to be a Theater reset. And then 2 weeks later, there's going to be an Abyss reset. If they change the roster for Abyss and for Theater on every reset, that would mean Abyss changes every 4 weeks instead of every 6 weeks, which would be nice, I guess. But for those of you that don't play Abyss outside of just claiming the rewards for it, that means that you're only getting half the content from Abyss. Yeah, it averages out to a little bit more primos than before, because they're also slightly buffing the primos you get from Abyss, but it's not a very significant change. Anyways, that's gonna be it for this one, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, YouTube.